longest I've stayed quiet since I was in the principal's office in 8th grade at St. Peter's.
Yeah, I try to do that. Anyway, there's some really neat pictures for backgrounds on Zoom.
Chris, how's the prep football team going to be this year?
If we have one, we'll be good.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see. All right. Well, let's not punish the punctual, and we can get started. Thank you very much, everybody across the country, for joining us. My name is Chris Hagerty, and I'm a senior partner at Partners in Mission, and also president-to-be at my high school alma mater, Cathedral Prep, along with Ville Marie Academy, Mother Teresa Academy, right here in little old Erie, Pennsylvania, where I am at this very, very moment. Thank you so much to all of you for investing your time with us, and we promise that that investment will have great return and will be in spades and dividends when you learn from our great panelists that we have in front of you from Catholic Investment Services. Before I get into introductions, I would like to ask all of us to join in prayer as we go through this very critical time that we are in and the pandemic that we're in. We need to understand that our mission stays focused on Catholic education, and that everything that we do is centered on our prayerful reflection of what we do. So in lieu of my slide not quite doing what I would like it to right now, we'll simply bow our heads in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Oh, Heavenly Father, you sent your Son to us in Jesus Christ, and in him we have our hope, and we have everything that we could ever want through him and through you. We ask that you today and for the coming time to pray for us, to be with us in this most difficult time, to pray for our healthcare workers, for all those that are sick, for all those who may be sick, that we heal them, not just physically, but we heal them spiritually. For all of the people involved in Catholic education in this most critical mission, we pray that you be with them, that you give us strength, that you give us guidance, so that we together may collectively do your will. And we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. So a couple of ground rules, if we would, as we move on here, everyone. You see a Q&A button. We'd ask that first you mute all of your devices. And if you have a question, please send it along. And in the last half hour, we will catch as many questions as we possibly can within the hour that we have for the webinar. So any question at all, large, small, medium, you send it our way, and we'll do our best to have our panelists answer the questions for you. Also, that we will let you know that we are recording this. The recording will be up in several different locations. We'll let you know the slide deck will be available as well for you to access. And with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. First, we have as the Director of Investment Relations for Catholic Investment Services, Zela Astarjian. Zela is right here, and Zela is going to handle the Q&A portion. We also have with us Tom Lanctot, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Catholic Investment Services. Tom is joining us from Chicago. And we have Scott Malpass, who's the Chief Investment Officer for the University of Notre Dame. I'm just going to call him EG, which is Endowment Guru for the time being and for the rest of the webinar. And Scott is right now in his office on the campus of the university. And we are so pleased to have him and Tom as our panelists as we go through this most important part of Catholic education. We at Partners in Mission realize how important endowments are to the future of our schools. And quite frankly, Catholic education has not quite done a good enough job in building endowments for our school. We believe that an endowment should be 2 times one's annual budget. So if you have an annual budget of $10 million, we would hope that your endowment is 20 million. My guess is many of the people on this call aren't quite at that level. And the idea of Catholic Investment Services, and indeed this entire webinar, is how do we build those endowments to a sustainable point so that we can comfortably and confidently move our missions forward. Our school in Erie was fortunate enough very early on to partner with Catholic Investment Services back in 2014 when it was formed as a nonprofit. And our school has been incredibly thrilled to be there, although I don't remember receiving any type of a discount for being the first Catholic high school on board. Tom, we can talk about that after the webinar possibly, but we were very pleased, and still 6-7 years later, still great partners with CIS. So with that, I want to start off with Scott, if we could, to talk about the genesis of CIS and how you came about the vision for this company.
Thank you, Chris. And it's nice to be with you as a fellow Erieite as well. But I want to welcome all of our friends around the country. This is a wonderful way to have a chance to interact with you during these very unusual times. I've done more Zoom meetings in the last 3 months than the rest of my history combined. So, but I found it very effective, and maybe more effective than I thought it would be. But I will say that because of my seat at Notre Dame as CIO, I've been asked over the years by many, many Catholic groups, would you look at our portfolio? Would you give us advice? Would you be on our investment committee, et cetera? And I've just had a chance to observe the struggles that particularly smaller Catholic organizations have in trying to determine what their investment policy should be. How are they going to access good managers? How are they going to do the Catholic screens for social responsibility? And just the whole array of issues that we have to deal with as investors. And in many cases, there's not the expertise in the organization, and they're not really sure where to go. And unfortunately, they often have ended up in very inferior situations with paying a lot of high fees with local brokers, financial advisors. We've seen the whole array of solutions that I just felt that just weren't working. And it just felt like my team and I at Notre Dame and could play a role here. So we teamed up with Jack Brennan, who had just left his job as CEO at Vanguard. Later, Tom Lanctot joined us. We got Zela to come on board and help us. But our goal was to really try to find a way to mesh some of the advantage we've had at Notre Dame in accessing good managers, superior money management with the appropriate screens, and provide over time a suite of investment products that could really satisfy and provide solutions for a whole range of Catholic organizations. So that's, Chris, what we set out to do. We launched our initial product, which was a long-term asset management endowment product, fully liquid, and then more recently we launched a private equity product. And we want to do other things too, but we really wanted to find a way to create a Catholic money management firm for the long term that could be a trusted partner and advisor to the Catholic community. That was really our initial plan. And Notre Dame helped seed the initial fund offering, Catholic Endowment Fund, with $100 million back in 2014.
Wow.
And I've been very pleased and very proud to be a part of that.
Well, that's great. So Scott, does your office, the university's investment arm, interact with CIS, or do we share strategies? How does that relationship work?
Yes, exactly. So of course I'm on the board, and then my investment team, who are all Catholics, quite frankly, or I think almost all of them, maybe one, but all Notre Dame grads. So all went here, and they love this. They love having a chance to work with Tom and Zela and the team and our sub-advisor Tiff, and share ideas and strategy, help them get access to managers. We have some managers that we were able to strong arm a little bit, if you will, and just say, hey, it'd be nice if you could take a small separate account for the Catholic Endowment Fund and be separate so we could do the screens and be able to implement the strategy with some top firms. So we had 4 or 5 managers that we were able to do that with, and as part of the manager lineup. So it's an ongoing collaboration. We have a check-in every few months, and really the real value is just the staffs know each other. They just pick up the phone. They pick up the phone, they share ideas and due diligence. So that's really worked very, very well.
That's awesome. So Scott, take us through a little bit about where Notre Dame's endowment was in the 90s when you arrived, where it is today, and what that impact has had on the student life at Notre Dame in terms of tuition assistance and financial aid.
Yeah, I think back to the late 80s. I know our endowment was only about 400 million, which was, I guess it was top 25 even then, but it was only about, 5-10%. It was not even 10%. It was less than 10% of our operating budget. So it wasn't, tuition was probably like 70% then. Now endowment spending is 30% of our operating budget and tuition is about 35%. And that's a much better position to be in for the long term. So I think there was a moment there where the board got serious and decided we were going to really try to build a first-rate investment operation. That over time, we would be raising money for major academic initiatives. And we wanted to make sure that the stewardship of that is among the best in the country. And so I was able to put a plan together to hire top staff, all the resources I needed, the appropriate governance structure and committee meetings. And over time, we were able to build a brand as an investor that gave us more and more access to top investment partners around the world. And it's been very gratifying just to see how that's played out. And a lot of the major endowments have done similar things, but they haven't done it the way we have in terms of having the Catholic screens and social responsibility the entire period. It's interesting. I'd go to meetings with my peers and they would say, "Oh, it's too bad you have to do those screens. You're not going to earn really superior returns if you have screens and you omit certain stocks." And I would just let it roll off my back because it was that we weren't going to change. We were going to do the screens. And now they're all calling me because the millennial generation wants more social investing and impact investing and some sort of social policy. And they don't know what to do because they don't have any underlying foundational ecclesiology, in terms of any religious aspect that they can call on to give them a starting point. So now we have a huge advantage in that we have a social responsible fund that meets the needs of the university, performing at a high level. So we wanted to bring, all that to CIS as well. And of course, the impact's been huge. We've grown to over 13 billion. Financial aid in particular went from, I think, 5 million a year to 170. And it's dramatically increased the quality and diversity of our student body, the quality of our faculty, the quality of our programs. International studies now, we have, I think, 70% of our undergraduates spend some time overseas. So I always call endowments kind of the 8th wonder of the world. I really think it's a powerful concept. And I know it's hard for small organizations to be able to start doing that. I completely get that. They're just living on a shoestring. They just can't get the money and raise it to put enough away. But boy, we got to keep trying to encourage that, because we did that 30 years ago, and look what the impact has been. Now we can raise money and our alumni become affluent and all of those things. But a lot of that growth, because we spend every year too. So a lot of that growth really has been investing. But it's been a huge impact on the institution. I don't think we can hear you, Chris.
Chris, I think you're frozen.
I think Chris might be frozen.
Well, Scott, why don't you?
Why don't I just keep going with some of the topics here?
Yeah. Well, why don't you talk about, if you wouldn't mind, talk about the ND Wall Street initiative and how that helped you, how that helped you build the endowment, and is there a model there for other institutions?
Well, it's about connection and engagement, really. That was really the genesis of it, to get our particularly our New York Wall Street alums, who work very long hours, are very busy people, just make sure they get fully engaged with the university and get back, et cetera. As you know, I started my career in New York, so I understand the pace of life there and how hard it is to make time for other things. So it was really about engagement, and it's been the fundraising and engagement from that committee work, the dinners we have, the conferences, the panels, a number of functions throughout the year, couples events, et cetera, has been extraordinary. It's really got them engaged. It has really helped us in partnering with them then in terms of various priorities on campus and development. So it's been a huge home run and a lot of fun to do. And
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
so Scott, before I get to Tom, in this world in which we're living right now, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in health. There's a lot of fear in investment. In this pandemic, I'm sure many of the folks in our audience are wondering, what's your strategy for ND's endowment? What's the CIS strategy as we're in literally these uncharted waters?
Well, that is absolutely correct. These are definitely uncharted. We've certainly faced various crises and a couple major crises over the last 30 years, but this particular one is very unique. We haven't changed our process at all. I mean, in a crisis, you tend to want to over-communicate. Certainly our investment partners, we're calling them, talking to them more, getting ideas from them. Should we be adding to their portfolio? Should we be looking at different themes? What new themes are emerging that could be more interesting now? Maybe what themes are less interesting? So just a lot of discussion with partners about investment opportunities, a lot of discussion about liquidity in the portfolio. When your fund is dropping, then you start thinking about, okay, how's my liquidity position? What am I going to be able to do, et cetera? So just a lot of conversation. But ultimately for us, it was a lot about, okay, there's going to be some really great assets that are going to be a lot cheaper. And we want to invest in those. And we want to make sure we got to the right people to help us do that. But no change in process. Look, you have a discipline, there's a lot of unknown. I remember back in 2008, Chris, when there were some pretty savvy foundations. They were not Catholic, but some pretty savvy foundations who had pretty big pools of money, sold out at the bottom, and then went into a bunch of high-fee, crazy investment banking product, and they never recovered. And it was just the worst example of fiduciary oversight, panic. That's the last thing you want to do. You have a discipline, stick with it, talk to your advisors. If you need more help, you get it. Watch your liquidity. There's a number of things you try to do, knowing that we can't control what's going to happen in the markets, ultimately. And if you were taking too much risk, the planning to put a program together has to have a certain assumption about what volatility you're willing to take. And that has to be consistent with your institutional objectives. And if that's out of whack, maybe you do need to change it, but you don't want to change it when the market's in a free fall. You want to change it when things are a little healthier. So no real change. I think, just as I said, advice for smaller and medium-sized funds is really stay disciplined, stick to your plan, communicate with your advisors, et cetera. I know that's hard to do. It's hard to just stay calm and don't do much. But that generally is what has worked. And then rebalance, find opportunities to rebalance and add money back into the market. By the way, if you put money back in the market in March, you did really well, really well.
Sure did.
So those would be some of the basic things,
Well, thank you. That's a great transition to Tom. So Tom, in board governance considerations for managing endowments, some boards have investment committees as part of their finance committee, some do not. What can you share with all of us about these considerations for managing endowment and some of the best practices?
Sure. Well, Chris, let me just add my thanks to you and your colleagues at Partners in Mission for collaborating with us on this webinar today. And thanks, special thanks, as you said, to our participants who were with us. And we very much appreciate being here. And I'm going to make some, given the diversity of our audience, I'm going to make some broad generalizations. So forgive me for that, and I'm always happy to follow up offline. As Scott said, our mission is to serve Catholic investors, and we're organized as a nonprofit. So that's what we're here to do, is help Catholic investors. So, I think, Chris, the investment nomenclature is often confusing, and schools and other Catholic investors may have different pools. May have cash pools, may have operating reserves, but we're really today talking about long-term investments and trying to build the long-term investment platform for an educational institution. And there's no single playbook for governance. There's no single playbook for how. Obviously, it's not one size fits all, but there's lots of good guidance available. And Scott mentioned Jack Brennan, who's a retired CEO of Vanguard, and Scott serves on the Vanguard board. Jack's our board chair at CIS, but Vanguard's got a very good, as do other organizations, a very good kind of best practices guide for an investments committee. In fact, it's quite elaborate, and you can kind of cherry pick from it. I think there are lots of good sample investment policy statements available, and we certainly we're certainly in a position to share some of those at CIS. In fact, we're working on a new website, which we hope to roll out soon, and we're going to have one of the first things we're going to do is have a podcast on investment committee best practices, and have one of our board members, Paul Stevens, kind of head that up. But again, these are some observations based. My experience as a fiduciary, as well as being a partner to Catholic nonprofits, I serve on a bunch of nonprofit boards, and have seen the great and the not so great over time. I think the foundation for any investment committee is the investment policy statement, the IPS, and it should present guidelines and not rules. It should include asset allocation parameters. How best to evaluate investment performance. And we would certainly argue, as Scott did so well, it should include Catholic values. And again, as Scott mentioned, we're taking the long view here. We're talking about an institution's permanent capital. And as Scott mentioned, I don't have to repeat the war stories. There were some terrible decisions made in 2008, and even by some really smart people. And one institution that I'm very familiar with, very sophisticated board, very sophisticated governance. They hit the panic button and liquidated equity investments at exactly the wrong time to pay down debt, and they missed out on the whole recovery, and they've been kicking themselves ever since. In terms of membership of an investment committee, I think you want to balance continuity with new blood. I think institutional memory is incredibly valuable, and Scott could really give this better than I can, but I think excessive turnover can be disruptive and erode effectiveness of the committee. I think you want to have a good balance of skill sets on the committee, not just people who are investment pros. You never want to micromanage, right? And again, I was on a committee for a relatively large endowment, and we had some very, I call them masters in the universe. These were very accomplished investment professionals, and they all sort of canceled each other out. It was 2 + 2 = 3. So, don't micromanage. Don't think you can time the market. And Scott's already said stick to your plan. There's lots of ways to lose and a lot fewer ways to win. There's the third rail of corporate governance, which is conflicts of interest. You've got to have a policy and process. Scott, for example, I think this is true, Scott, you don't allow your money managers to make contributions to the universities. Do I understand that correctly?
Correct. And the bigger issue is we don't allow trustees to manage money for us.
Yeah. Wow. And I know that's not for a lot of the institutions that are participating on today's call, that's easier said than done. But again, one of the premises, and I'll talk our own book here for a minute. One of our premises at CIS is we provide a safe harbor by being a nonprofit and better alignment of interests. Don't let your meeting schedule drive or delay decisions. You've got to be flexible. You just can't be hung up by, well, we only have 3 meetings a year. You've got, if something important comes up, you've got to be able to meet and decide. Again, not suggesting you make short-term decisions, but just you've got to be flexible and not completely wedded to a arbitrary schedule. Ask the right questions, know what you don't know. Humility goes a long way. Check your egos at the door, and first and foremost, get independent and unbiased advice, and that's again what we're all about at CIS.
Indeed. So what I'm hearing from both of you is stay the course, right? Don't press the panic button.
Scott said it's hard. Scott said it's hard. It's hard, and that's why, you know, and Chris, you know this. As soon as things started going haywire, we started, you know, at CIS, we certainly started communicating and trying to, you know, keep people informed as to what was going on and what made the most sense in terms of next steps.
So, Tom, you know, one of the beauties of CIS is that you have, for us, taken care of that so important aspect of the Catholic socially responsible investment policies, right? By investing with CIS, that's a given. It's a done deal, as Scott explained to us. But for those of us that don't have that, what are some things you can advise for our guests as to how to implement, the best way to implement that Catholic social responsibility investment policy?
Sure. So you know, I think Scott mentioned it. I think the place to start is there's a common misconception that you sacrifice returns by screening for, by investing in accordance with Catholic social teachings. And I think ND is proof positive. And I think we've certainly at Catholic Investment Services proven that that's not true. I think most people are aware of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They promulgated guidelines really back in 2003. They're not perfect. They're in the process of being revised. We're told, although, as you know, they're not the most transparent group in the world. We're told that the new guidelines will be available, we think, in the fall of 2021. But that said, you know, we use the current guidelines, and I think at CIS we have a very robust screening process for Catholic investing. But the current guidelines that the bishops have promulgated really are focused on doing no harm, negative screen, avoid certain kinds of activities, certain kinds of businesses, versus acting in a positive versus positive action. And again, I think historically CIS has been focused on, I think we probably do as robust a screening process, again, in partnership with Notre Dame, a great resource for us as anybody in the investment business. We're starting to see Catholic investing shift to a greater focus on impact and ESG. And you probably all have heard those terms. There are a lot of skeptics who are wondering, are these just, you know, fads versus substance? I think we're very focused on the substance of those things. Laudato Si, we just celebrated the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si. I think we've just put a policy paper together on that where we've identified some, you know, pretty constructive alternatives in the whole fossil fuels area. You know, I think, and again, we'd argue that you ought to have, and we can certainly help incorporate Catholic investing, Catholic values in your investment policy statement. I think a big reason is you want to avoid institutional embarrassment. Somebody finding out that you're investing in something that the church doesn't approve of. And the flip side is we've done a number of surveys at CIS that show that donors are, and Chris, this is right up your alley. I mean, donors are more generous if they think their money's being invested in accordance with Catholic values.
Indeed. And then if you could, Tom, just talk a bit about liquidity levels, spending rates, reserves.
Sure. For
those of us that have some semblance of an endowment, large,
sure.
small, or medium.
Sure. And Scott's touched on some of this already, but and again, I may be stating the obvious here, some of this, but this risk management is really key. And especially smaller and more fragile institutions, risk management is really key. And endowment is, as we mentioned, permanent capital, and it's sort of like police departments say they serve and protect. I think the goal of an endowment, you want to grow it, but you want to protect it. Manage your cash and operating reserves separately from your endowment. I think that's critical. You're focused on long-term investing with your endowment. I think the ND experience, again, as Scott mentioned, illustrates the great benefit of growth. And again, it's part of the premise of CIS is to allow Catholic institutions to do more, enhance their missions. Asset allocation, very important. The trick, of course, is to be aggressive enough to grow your endowment and conservative enough to avoid disaster. And again, the devil's in the detail. The challenge, I think, for a lot of investors lately has been that fixed income has really not been much of a safe harbor. It used to be that fixed income allocation was a pretty good risk mitigator and liquidity, but that with rates so low, that hasn't been as helpful. You've got to watch your endowment draw. There's always a temptation. Well, we're just going to do it this year, right? We're going to take a little more this year. And I think with people who are a lot smarter than I am, and that's most of the world, saying that future investment returns are going to be muted, you got to ratchet down your draw so that you don't erode your purchasing power. As Scott said, you've got to, particularly when markets are unsettled, you got to make sure you've got sufficient liquidity, whether it's in public equities or treasuries, for the draws that you need and for emergencies. And I think the larger your portfolio gets, I think the more investors ought to take a look at the appropriate role of alternatives for risk management. By alternatives, I'm going to use the hated word hedge fund, but they've really proven that they're useful in times of market volatility, and private equity, particularly if you're talking about long-term investing. But these are incremental steps. So, Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and the other great way to grow an endowment is to go out and fundraise, right? And so I think maybe you could share. Everybody wants to have an endowment, right? Nobody doesn't want to have does not want to have an endowment, but how do you build one? And
Sure.
I think that was one of the things. I think Scott's mentioning the Wall Street Initiative. I think every school has got successful alums who ought to be willing and able to help build a permanent source of capital. So let me kick it back to you.
Well, so quickly on that, Tom, capital campaigns are certainly one way that schools attempt to grow an endowment, but capital campaigns primarily are for building buildings. The best way to grow an endowment is to have a consistent, robust plan giving program. And planned gifts are now being included in virtually every endowment or every campaign that we are currently working with. So if a donor does not have available cash right now, maybe in this market where people might be a bit timid to solicit people for cash gifts now, you can still have that planned giving conversation, because planned gifts are what will indeed grow endowment substantially. In many Catholic schools and Catholic organizations, the largest gift they're going to receive will come from a planned gift at some point in time. It will be somebody's lifetime gift to that institution in school that will catapult it to a completely other level. So during this time of the pandemic, we're recommending to all of our clients to stay the course, don't pause your campaign, be very careful who you're soliciting, do your homework and do your research, but shift to planned giving. Although at Cathedral Prep and Little O'Leary, PA, we didn't go from 300 and some million to 13 billion, but we went from about 2 million to almost 14 million in the last 15 years. And it's grown through investment, through partnership with CIS, but certainly because we started taking planned giving seriously. And we have now built up, and we believe every school in every diocese should have a file that has, hey, we have confirmed $10 million in planned gifts from the following individuals. And that's how to grow that portfolio to help feed our endowments, to help feed CIS, then take that money and invest it. So long and short of it is that, but they don't want to hear from me, Tom. They want to hear from you and Scott. So why don't we shift over some Q&A? We've got again, if you have a question, please go to the Q&A button, and Zela is going to grab some of your questions. We have many to get to. So Zela, you got the ball, you throw it.
Thank you, Chris. It's a great discussion. We have a bunch of questions that have come in, and feel free to ask more questions. We'll try to get to all of them if possible. First question is for Scott. How does Notre Dame meet the gap between endowment and tuition and fundraising?
Well, I'm just thinking about, so tuition's about 35%, endowment spending is around 30. We use some of the unrestricted giving to be part of the operating budget, but that's a smaller piece because a lot of the fundraising are for restricted purposes that are either newly being formed or already existing. Those earnings will then flow to the operating budget through those endowments. And so we call auxiliary enterprises, athletics. So that would include like the bookstore, certainly room and board, various athletic revenues, those kinds of things that complete the full budget for the university, which is about 1.4 billion. And I should add, certainly research contracts and grants are a big part of that too, because they research tends to pay for itself through grants and contracts, those costs. So we obviously get a significant amount of that in as well as part of the operating budget.
Right. This next question, I think, could be answered by either Chris or Scott. How have you guided your message for endowments when local business and alumni have been affected financially by the COVID pandemic?
Okay, I can take a quick swing at that one. I think that, there are 6 steps to solicitation, and it's identification, research, assignment, solicitation, stewardship, cultivation, right? And I think you go back to the research and identification piece. And you need to do a lot of research on who those potential donors, who those prospects might be. And obviously, you take a look at, there are some areas of this country that are doing exceptionally well during the pandemic, right? And I'm not saying this to be facetious, but alcohol sales are up 29% all over this country. If somebody is in that business or the winery business, they're askable right now. And I mean that very seriously. So if you do your research, there are some aspects of our economy that are doing really well. Attorneys who do estate planning, they can't get off the phone right now. People are doing estate planning more now than ever. People are realizing, this helps you think about mortality. They're doing really well. So I think you have to pick and choose who those candidates might be. But certainly, there are askable prospects and askable moments that can lead to success. And we have a client 2 weeks ago that secured a $1.2 million gift for their school. Last week, a client secured a $500,000 gift in the middle of the pandemic. It's there, but you have to be smart about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer, Chris. And I think our posture here was really not to be out asking for money as a general principle during this period. We did raise a fund for financial aid, a pandemic fund for kids who were particularly impacted by the crisis, their families, and including staff have given up some of the senior staff have given up some salary to help fund this pandemic fund. So we were willing to ask for that because people were calling us saying we'd like to find a way to help families that are affected by the pandemic. And so that was really gratifying. But that was really the only thing we've done here.
Yeah, you had a pretty good giving day, Scott. It was 12 hours. It was how much?
I never saw the final. That's an annual event. It's part of our overall fundraising activity.
Right.
I usually often speak at that, but no, they do well with that.
I was paying. It was a little north of $8 million.
I was going to say it's usually in that neighborhood. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so this next question I think is to Tom first and maybe Scott. What is CIS and Notre Dame's position on screening energy companies?
So CIS is moving towards a zero tolerance on fossil fuels. So we're in the process of disengaging from any fossil fuel investments. Right now, we have a very low exposure, probably less than 2% of our portfolio has any kind of fossil fuel exposure. So, but we and Scott is more articulate on this than I am. But we want to be constructive in how we approach energy, and I think there are a lot of opportunities to invest in energy businesses that are alternatives to fossil fuels, that have technological technologies that are great substitutes for fossil fuels. Scott, you know a lot more about this than I do.
No, our approach is similar. We consciously decided to de-emphasize any new fossil fuel investments and let existing ones roll off. Most of ours were in private funds. Most of our exposure has been in private equity energy funds. And that's the only exposure we have left. It's also less than 2%. So it's a very small amount, and those will just roll off, and we're not making any more investments. To be honest, quite frankly, there are so many interesting private equity opportunities that are not energy. We certainly don't need it to earn good returns. And given how the world's evolving, we'd rather use the money to support other kinds of investments that do provide positive impact. So we've been very pleased to move that direction. I think it makes total sense for Catholic organizations. So very similar, Tom.
Next question is for Scott. Using ND's example of endowment growth from $450 million to $14 billion today, how much of that is due to investment growth and how much is from new contribution to the endowment funds? And what was their strategy to acquire new contributions?
Yeah, so I don't think I've ever done the actual scientific calculation to break out how much was from growth and how much from new fundraising. But if you look at just the cash flows over that 30 years, the income and outflow has been very similar. So it's been very, very, very close. So we've brought in just about as much as we've spent from the endowment pool. So clearly a more significant amount of the growth has been from market returns over time. But you don't build that base that without the additional fundraising. So I would guess, I think if you did a very careful analysis, I bet it'd be more like kind of 70-30 or something like that. We've just been fortunate. We're now spending like $500 million a year from the pool, and we're bringing in something close to that. So it's probably right in that neighborhood, but that's going to vary a lot by institution. That's going to vary a lot.
Next question is, I would say both Tom and Scott. In light of the do no harm language of the US CCB guidelines, what is CIS's position on screening Chinese corporations?
I'm going to let Scott take that.
Yeah, CIS adopted a very similar strategy to what we do at Notre Dame. You know, China is the second biggest economy in the world. I've been to China 40 times. There are great people in China. And just as there are great companies in China that are very ethical and have high integrity. So the screen is comparable. You know, we're excluding key areas that we would not invest in, like all the sanctity of life areas. And then we're looking at all the other sectors the same way we do in the US. We're not overlaying a macro screen just because it's China. Because I can tell you, there are fabulous people in China that do really good stuff. And it's a huge economy and a great opportunity. Having said that, given what's going on in the world today, we're certainly monitoring events. There's some concern about political risks and how that might affect innovation and opportunities going forward. It's certainly fair to be concerned about that and maybe not adding exposure right now. But we put them through a very rigorous lens at Notre Dame and CIS. You can argue there's good and bad companies and good and bad people everywhere in the world. And I just don't think it's fair to paint the entire country as not being eligible for investing, because we've had some great people we've worked with in China who I trust completely.
Right. Next question is about UBTI, which, by the way, is unrelated business income tax. And this is for Scott. Is it acceptable for Catholic entities to invest in offshore private equity and or private credit vehicles to avoid UBTI? We've had some concern that it might send an unacceptable message if it were to become public.
I mean, there are very established tax rules that apply to this, very established legal and tax rules in various jurisdictions. And I think if you're following all of those rules, no, I don't think you should be concerned about that. It's probably not going to be the adoption of those kinds of vehicles is probably going to be pretty limited unless you're a very large investor. And then it's really required to protect the institution. So as long as you're following all the various rules in those jurisdictions and U.S. tax law and policy, I would not have any concern about it becoming public.
Great. Next question. I would say this is both either Tom or Scott. Guide to start an investment committee or resources would be very helpful. Most of this is over my head. And by the way, we're putting a document together towards that effect, and we'll follow up in the next couple of weeks. But maybe, Tom, you want to give that a shot?
So I'm sorry, Zela, could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Guide to start an investment committee
Yeah.
or resources would be very helpful.
Sure. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of information. Zela had mentioned we're putting something together at CIS. There's a lot of information on good, high quality information that's available on that I'm happy offline. If you want to contact us, we can get you some background that would be helpful as a primer.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any resources?
I think I would rely on Tom, but I would like to add that, the question came from saying a lot of this is over my head, right? Yeah. And a lot of this is over my little head as well, right? A lot of initials, so some very technical things. And a lot of our schools, this is probably very new to them. My guess is there are many schools organizations on this call right now that do not have an investment committee at all. They probably have a finance committee of their board without an investment subcommittee. So my first recommendation to everybody is stay in touch. Zela's contact info will be part of the slide deck that you can contact Zela. And when Tom's ready to put his papers out, we can get them out to you on what those guidelines, principles might be on how to start an investment committee.
Yeah, and we're happy to do a call. We're happy to do a call and really drill down with you because again, it's our mission.
Right.
Next question. Is it okay to take a one-time pull on an endowment, even if it's in the 12 to 20%? Or would that be against UP-MIFA thoughts?
Well, I think you can do it if there are enough gains to do it. I think it's a possibility under UMIFA if you had appropriate gains. It'd be really more the fiduciary aspect of that, and then undermining the long-term financial position of the fund. That would be a very large draw, but certainly that's up to the board as long as there are sufficient gains to provide it. It would not be something I'd recommend generally.
This next question, I would say, is for Chris. What is the best way to engage alumni at an elementary school?
Okay, that's a little off the beaten path. However, the best way is, first of all, for elementary schools, sometimes it's difficult to even find their alumni, right? And the best way to do that is to make sure that you know who your alumni are, and then you can go about finding them. What I think best answer in the time that we have left is that my information will also that conversation with them, because our elementary schools are the backbone of Catholic education. They feed our high schools. they feed our universities. They feed our pews as they grow into it, these folks grow into adulthood. So it's important for our elementary schools to be in the advancement mode, and I can probably help that question offline, Zela.
Chris, there's one more question I think that's in your area of expertise. What are some ideas about balancing a capital campaign and a planned giving strategy for endowments at the same time?
Okay, so we believe there should be three aspects to every capital campaign. Annual, I call it the Holy Trinity. It's annual growth, annual giving, capital needs for building plans, and endowment. That is the Holy Trinity of giving for Catholic organizations. And there should be a balance of all three of those, because if any three of those are out of whack, your school is going to suffer in the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
So there should be, in every campaign, a piece should be annual giving, a piece should be building growth, and endowment growth. And depending on what a given school situation is, depends on how you want to break up that pie. But all three pieces should be part of every capital campaign.
Okay. Next question. We have about 10 million in cash in securities account. We love the idea of a planned giving, thank you, but we don't hear from our advisor who's an alum. So they don't hear from the advisor regularly, and we have never shopped his performance. Any thoughts?
I have a
Go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, Chris.
Tom and Scott might be a little compromised position there. So let Hagerty chime in if we could for just 1 second, right? I can tell you based on experience that probably one of the most difficult things for a Catholic high school to do, who has alum involved in their endowment investment, is how do you have that conversation that, maybe there's another way. And we had to have that conversation in Erie, Pennsylvania Cathedral Prep when we moved our endowment from a local organization to CIS, right? It's a conversation that needs to take place, and here's why. There is no one person, there is no one organization, there is no one constituency that is more important than the mission of a Catholic school or a Catholic diocese. The mission is first, foremost, and always. And you must do what's in the best interest of the mission, regardless of relationship.
Thank
I
you,
do okay
Chris.
with that, guys?
That was great. There was another question somebody else was asking in another way, of how to do that without offending the alumni.
Right.
I think you answered it. Tom, do you want to add anything, or Scott?
It was perfect.
Thanks.
Perfect. Next question is for Chris. Chris, do you have a target donor guideline in your slides? No.
I don't really know. I don't understand what the target donor guideline. I'm not sure. I can tell you this: your best plan giving prospects will be your loyal donors. It will not necessarily be your high-end net worth individuals. If you're trying to build a plan giving program, you look at those annual fund donors who've contributed for 5, 10, 15 consecutive years. And in those people, you will find your plan givers.
Chris, aren't you always surprised by the gifts that you receive from people that were never either always modest annual givers or people who were never really on your radar screen, right?
Every single year. It is not a surprise to us anymore, Tom, that your $100 annual fund donor made a bequest to the school that was $50,000 to $100,000, that their largest gift will be as God calls them home. And so it's not a shock to us anymore because we see it time and time again.
This next question is for Scott. Would smaller endowments benefit from a passive investment strategy? If yes, is that true for endowments of all sizes, or is there a point or a size at which active management should be considered?
Yeah, no, I think, look, there are going to be organizations that have no edge. They don't have the proper advisors. They don't have access to managers. They don't even have a committee, as Chris mentioned. So in some of those cases, if they really can't get access to good money managers, passive is a legitimate and appropriate way to go, low cost indexing. And as someone who's on the Vanguard board, which does a lot of that, I absolutely espouse that that's a legitimate approach for a lot of organizations. In our case, we built an in-house team, and we feel we can access the very best managers in the world, so we have not done passive. That doesn't mean we never would. As we get larger and larger, I think passive could ultimately play some role. The investment business has gotten very competitive, but right now we don't. So the thinking about CIS was, look, we can access good managers. Let's access the best managers, do the screens, and try to earn returns over the long term that are better than the market, net of fees. So that's our thesis, and that's similar to the thesis in Notre Dame. But there are going to be some very small amounts of money. They're not going to be big enough, or they're not going to have any idea how to find appropriate managers, where a passive approach is certainly legitimate.
Right. Is that zero tolerance for fossil fuels reflective of changes you're expecting in the US CCB guidelines, or is that just a general change in investor sentiment?
I think in our case, it's a change. In our case, it's a change in investment sentiment, and I think we're influenced by, among other things, Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical, and just other considerations. And I think there is particularly younger Catholics are very interested in these issues, and I think look, we're hopefully we all get back on airplanes sometimes, right? So we're not going to take this to extremes, but I think this is the direction the world's heading, and I think we've got lots of great alternatives.
I agree completely with what Tom said. I think the Catholic world's headed that way. The Holy See, the Vatican, is also showing the way, and younger millennials absolutely want that, and that's where we're headed. So I think that you'll definitely see that continue.
Right.
Zela, I think we have time, Zela, for maybe one or two more questions.
I think so too, Chris. We have a good question here. There's so many more. But anyway, this one is a really good one. I see how this is applicable to larger schools, specifically universities. But how does a small Catholic elementary school start an endowment fund? And I don't know if this—
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, so it's a really good question, and we would certainly hope that many more of our elementary schools go ahead and do so. And again, if you're starting literally from scratch, the best thing to do is through your board, advisory, it might be advisory nature, to create a finance committee and an investment committee in that side. And on your advancement side, to create a plan giving committee. You may not have the horsepower within the school to have the knowledge to do that, but you certainly in your database have alums, current parents, parents of alums, parishioners, who are attorneys, who are investment officers, who are financial planners, who'd be more than happy to start a plan giving committee. And that's exactly where I would begin, to start with that committee and then begin the foundation of a plan giving program to build that, right? Along with strategies to solicit certain people who may be in a position to make cash gifts to build an endowment. And start with the notion of scholarships and financial aid. It's still, that tugs at the heartstrings of many, many people who want to see Catholic education accessible to everyone.
One question here that was on the chat. What is recommended annual draw for a Catholic high school? Endowment is at about 1.5 times the annual operating budget. I think this is for you, Chris.
Well, I think if you look at the capital markets and what returns are available, endowments and foundations and eleemosynary in general have generally felt that you want to spend around 5%. And that should be on a smooth basis as well, not 5% of this year's value, but maybe 5% of a 3-year average, because funds go up and down, right? So it's just, if you look at the capital markets returns, you're spending much more than that. You're eating into principal. You're not reinvesting for inflation. And if you're spending less, you probably aren't helping the institution enough to meet its goals. So it's a fine line, but that number's kind of stood the test of time. And, we'll see what the capital markets are going to provide the next 10 years. I think it's going to be very challenging. I think having professional advice and getting in a proper portfolio will be very helpful, because I think it's going to be very tough sledding. And you want every advantage you can get. And it may be hard to stay at 5%. It may end up being less. But right now, it feels like that's still about the right number. But again, on the smooth value, not a point in time.
Chris, I think we have a few more questions, but we're out of time. But one question here was, are these slides going to be available after the
Yes.
webinar? And
So,
yes, go ahead.
yeah, we will have the entire webinar recording and the slide deck available on the Partners in Mission website for certain. So folks can grab it there, and you can share that recording with some of your colleagues, with your board members, if you'd like, right? You'll be able to share what we've talked about for the last hour. But I'd like to thank any information you may have. If you have further questions, Zela's information is right here in Investor Relations, and Zela would love to have a conversation with you. But I'd love to thank Zela, Scott, and Tom. Any closing comments? Thank you so much.
Chris, thank you. It's been a great pleasure to be with you today, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Same, Chris. Thanks a lot, and continued blessings in your work, what you're doing with these great organizations around the country. And just all the best to everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hope to see you soon.
You bet. Thank you.
Great.
And any information on Partners in Mission, you can send it my way. Information's attached. Because we are a company of hope, we still hope to gather some of us in Boston in late July. We're waiting actually to hear this afternoon on new guidelines from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But if you are one who likes to travel and have hope, we will be there. And we have to end it by saying we'd love to see all of you on Saturday, September 12th for the Notre Dame Arkansas game. If they're allowing tailgating at Notre Dame Stadium, Larry Fury will be there outside of the main gates, and we will be ready to go tailgating Partners in Mission style. On behalf of Larry and the entire Partners in Mission team, thank you so much. We continue to have all of you in our prayers in this time. Be healthy, be safe, and remember, you can't take your cash to the kingdom. God bless.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Chris.
Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.